Our partners at KKTV in Colorado Springs say they have confirmed that Gannon was shot and stabbed. His body was placed in a suitcase and left by a bridge in Florida, where it was found by workers last week.
For the alleged use of a firearm, a blunt instrument, a knife or other sharp object, and for causing the death of Gannon Stauch.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most trusted voice in true crime. So the Gannon Stauch case sort of is rumbling along despite everything that is happening in the world. Apparently the coronavirus isn't having any effect on the progress of this particular case, interestingly enough. Of course that may change, but we'll see. Other things that have been happening is Al Stauch has applied to divorce his wife, Letecia, and Colorado has just repealed the death penalty, and I've got a little piece about that and how it may affect Chris Watts on my Patreon page. Some other creators have sort of gone into these areas. I'm not going to go into the same area. One thing I am going to do is touch on something that I think Scott Reich mentioned, which is there is around about 20 pages in the endorsed witness list, and I provided a copy of that also on my Patreon page. So what's interesting about that endorsed witness list is if you go through the list, there is a not a chronological list, but certainly a how can I put it? It's a list in a particular order. I'd like to say geographical order, but that's not really the right word. You'll know what I mean when we kind of deal with it. But basically, when you go down this endorsed witness list, there are a heck of a lot of FBI agents. And although their names aren't necessarily that important, what is interesting is where these agents are. And Scott Reich mentioned them in his episode, but when you actually track the locations of these agents, you can actually track the exact route that Letecia or someone else, or Letecia and someone else, took from Colorado Springs to Pace and possibly as far as Jacksonville, Florida, and then back up to Myrtle Beach, and I'm going to take you through that. Now, you might think this is rocket science, tracking these locations is something very difficult, but fortunately the El Paso Sheriff's Office has kindly put it in a kind of order where when you put in these locations in the order that they're given, they actually line up perfectly with the actual route from Colorado Springs to Pace, Florida, and then from Pace, Florida to Myrtle Beach. And that is kind of unexpected. So let me put it this way. If you didn't know where Gannon was found, and you didn't know where Letecia was arrested, and you just put in these locations, you would have basically followed the route, the route by road that a car would take from Colorado Springs to Pace to Myrtle Beach. Quite interesting. Now, before I take you onto the map to show you how it works, I'm not going to provide the actual names or addresses of these particular agents. You can go and look on the PDF, which, as I say, is on the Patreon page. You can go and do your own confirmation and looking around if you like. I'm not going to do that right now. Bear in mind a couple of things. Number one, the affidavit is still sealed, as it was in the Patrick Frazee case. It was sealed for quite a few months after that case was sort of being investigated. Affidavit only was released sort of closer to trial. The same is going to happen in this case. So bear in mind, until that's released and until the autopsy is released, nothing is really certain. Something that I have a little bit of a niggle with, and it's probably just being paranoid, but I didn't in the beginning read or hear the information the same way I think that the media did or everyone else did, which is it seems to be reported as fact that Gannon was shot, stabbed, possibly even bludgeoned, and in other words, these were the three ways that he was murdered: stabbed, or possibly in the order of being struck or abused in some way by a blunt object, then stabbed, and then shot, or something like that. Like I say, I could be overthinking it, probably am, but the way I kind of heard it and read it is that it was one or the other. That Letecia is being charged with murder as a result of being stabbed or being shot or being bludgeoned. But I could be wrong in the way I'm reading. It's hard. With a limited amount of information, it's hard to read. But when I listen to the Deputy District Attorney, I think it's the Deputy District Attorney Allen, talking about these objects, he doesn't say this one and that one and that one. He says this one, that one, or something. But it's a little bit difficult to be absolutely clear in what he's actually saying. So I'm just kind of expressing caution that one mustn't necessarily think that it's all of these things, but that it could be one of those things. One would think with an autopsy, if Gannon was shot, that there would be obvious evidence of that, but not necessarily. If you have advanced decomposition, you may not necessarily have clear evidence of that, although I would imagine a bullet wound, you would definitely have clear evidence of that. Between bludgeoning and stabbing, I guess, it's going to be, you would sort of expect to find confirmation of that in the fracturing of bones, especially. Again, we're talking about a body that's obviously in an advanced state of decay, so you're not necessarily going to get that much from the surface tissues, which may have disappeared or atrophied or decomposed or something like that. But also not necessarily that after a month you're not going to see some kind of evidence like that, especially if it's preserved within a suitcase. There might be little artifacts of a stabbing weapon or a something that was used to bludgeon. Let's say it was a wooden object. You might find little pieces of wood or something like that preserved within the suitcase. And I would imagine that Gannon was in a plastic bag within the suitcase. Poor child. So anyway, that is just something to bear in mind. Okay, so now we're going to go through the map. And I'm not from America, but when I look at the map, it does seem like pretty much the most sort of straightforward route from Colorado to Pace, wouldn't you say? But the great thing about Google is you can ask Google Maps what is the shortest and most direct distance. And it is in fact through Dallas, right? In other words, from Colorado Springs to Pace, Florida, the most direct route is 1,377 miles, 21 hours via Dallas. Let me just clarify, you would go through Dallas anyway, going either route. I'm just saying the section through Abilene, which we don't know for sure, but it does look like, since the sheriff's office or the FBI agent was from Abilene, Texas, that suggests that was a little bit of a route that was kind of unconventional. In some, and I mean, we don't know this for a fact, but in some, the route from Colorado to Florida does look pretty much as direct as it could possibly be made, right? And we can see that it could have taken, probably did take something like a day and a half to reach pace if one had driven pretty much consistently. So between 1.5 and 2 days. Something that I expected to see in the endorsed witness list, and it's not necessarily not there, it's just not that clear. There are a lot of names near the bottom of the list that have that don't have addresses. There's just sort of a name and a surname. And I remember when I investigated the Watts case, you had the same thing. It was like a preliminary document, and there were some names that didn't really have much beside them. I remember Nicole Kessinger was a name that stood out as well. I don't remember if her address was on there, but so you could basically take those names and search them on LinkedIn, and it wasn't foolproof, but you could kind of get a sense of, okay, so this person in this state, so it does look like they may have worked at a gas station, or they may have worked here, or they may have worked there. And so one can possibly fine-tune that witness list and get the information before it actually comes out in the affidavit. And that's probably the next logical step for those following this case, is to go and have a closer look at some of those names. As you've no doubt seen, there have been some even more detailed photos of the crime scene, sort of leading up to the bridge. And you don't have to look very closely, but you can see that the crime scene tape actually extends very, very clearly quite far down. It extends quite a way down to the pillars of the bridge and then kind of out of sight. We don't know whether the crime scene extends beyond that, and if it does, how far beyond that it does. But what one can see very clearly is anyone scrambling, whether holding a heavy suitcase or just scrambling around there, that would be very treacherous terrain to move over, even in the day. And so one can imagine whoever was scrambling over there didn't get very far, and that where the body was disposed of, I think it was disposed of out of sight, but I don't think it was disposed of out of smell. And that is, I think, how the construction worker discovered this suitcase. I don't think it was necessarily by sight. I think it was by smell. Now, the mistake made by I've called this a botched disposal before. The mistake that I think was made was, first of all, the terrain was really bad for doing something in a rushed way. But also, I think the person, whoever disposed of the body, assumed that you weren't going to get a passerby. So the person carrying the suitcase probably was aware of the smell while they were carrying it, but probably thought, well, someone driving by in their car would never smell anything, right? But they didn't assume that someone was going to walk by, in terms of walk slowly by this position, and that is kind of what happened. Now, I have cycled quite a lot, and I can tell you, I'm not a construction worker, but I can tell you, cycling along the road, one often comes across areas where you can tell something has died right next to the road. You can't see anything, but you can tell that something very close to the road has died, and it's not a ditch. It's not just sort of decomposing water or manure. It's a distinct smell, and so someone disposing of a body right next to the road is not a good idea. not if you want to get away with it. So one does get a sense that whoever did this did a very poor job, given the effort to get all that distance from Colorado. And one does wonder what the car smelled like and what happened to the car, especially knowing what we know with Casey Anthony's car. I think it's the Pontiac Sunfire, right? There are obviously ways you can mitigate stuff like that, which is, for example, putting a cadaver in a garbage bag and, put the garbage bag inside a suitcase. But, even a little drop of cadaver odor that leaks into the upholstery, just a drop of it, is going to have a very, very potent smell. And if you're in a car for any length of time, that smell is going to kind of accumulate. And isn't that what happened? So I'm not going to take it further than that. It remains to be seen whether this case is going to go into the next legal process. I have a feeling that as much as the legal process will want to continue, I do think it's going to be delayed, just as it has been. The Durst case has been delayed in California. I don't think the Durst case is going to kick up the time that they expect it to, and in the same way, I think this case is going to be delayed because of the pandemic. I think that is something that is being underestimated to a large extent. And obviously, court proceedings tend to be public gatherings where people sit in a confined space. So I don't see that likely to be going ahead. Bear in mind, you're not going to see a long criminal trial. You've first got to have those preliminary hearings. So I just don't see that happening anytime soon. I think it's going to be delayed. We are seeing a lot of innovations in terms of people working from home and working remotely and trying to deal with this pandemic in certain ways. It'll be interesting to see how the law deals with it, whether one can virtually conduct a court case. I have my doubts. I don't think you really can, but we will see. Thank you for listening. If you want to see the additional content that's posted on Patreon, visit patreon.com/TCRS. Stay safe, stay well, stay healthy. And I will see you guys next time.